Hi and welcome to this video tutorial in Pro Tools. In this video we're going to be looking at EQ. Okay, you can add EQ in this window. You can go to this menu here and you can go to Inserts and you can add them on this section, but I find this can get quite messy with everything being on the same screen, so I prefer just to do my editing on this screen and then add all my effects and processing in the next window. So remember, Command equals just to swap between them. So what you want is inserts A to E up on here. If these aren't showing, if you just go to the bottom, and I'll just zoom in here, it's this little menu button here. So we press this and you want to make sure inserts A to E are pressed on. If for some reason you're adding lots and lots of EQ and effects and processing, then you may need the further 5 that are inserts F to J, but most of the time these aren't necessary. Okay, so we'll just reduce those at the moment. Okay, so to add an insert, we just click in one of the gaps here, go down to Plugin, EQ, and then we choose which one we want. Now, I'm not sure if the university computers have the Air Kill EQ, but if they do, it's worthwhile investigating. The channel strip's a fairly new plugin. I'll just bring it up so you can see. The EQ section is this section at the bottom, but one thing to note is that you don't want to use the expander and gate and the compressor limiter. These are for future modules, so it's only this bottom section that you're using, so do take note of that. Or we'll go to the next one. So you've got a one band EQ. So you've got this section here. So this just allows us to choose one, but it does let us choose what type of filter it is. So high pass, a notch filter, high shelf, low shelf, a peak, or a low pass filter. So it just gives you a few different options there. And if you're only wanting to do a very common one is really doing a high pass filter, so you're just rolling off that low end. It's quite common to just have that, but I tend to find a lot of the time you want to use the 7-band EQ instead. The good thing about this is it allows you to do, I'll zoom in a bit so hopefully you can see it better. So it allows you to change your input levels and output levels. So sometimes it can be that your input level is a little loud, and when you start adding all these other effects, so say I start boosting this, etc., etc., we can start getting clipping there, and we don't want that. So you may need to turn the input down just a touch to start off with. If you have it that it's clipping before you've even started, it means that the track's clipped, so that's something that's gone wrong in the recording. This is a phase switch here, so if you do have any phase issues, then you can just change it in here while you're using your EQ. You've got a high pass filter, but also you can turn it into a notch filter, and the same with the low pass filter here. And I'll come on to a few of the settings in a second. So you need to switch these in, they're not automatically in. So if I just press it in, you can see that there on that side, and the same with the one at the end. Okay, so these you have to manually switch in, they're not automatically switched on. Whereas the low frequency, low mid frequency, mid frequency, and high frequency, they're all switched on automatically. Okay, and if you don't want them, you could just switch them off. It can be a good thing just to test out whether what you've done is sounding any good. You've got your Q factor here. So if you've seen the PowerPoint on StudyNet, we know that that's our bandwidth. So it's the bandwidth here. So if I just change it if I change the correct one, you can see that it's getting narrower and larger. So depending on what type of effect you wanted to do with the EQ will depend on how big your bandpass needs to be. You can also change it, instead of doing it on the rotary control, if you go in between the curve, so not on the little dot, that just moves it around either up or down, or the frequency. Whereas if you go in between, then that will make it narrower or fatter. Okay, so I'll just switch that off for now. Switch these ones off. So the only other thing to mention on here, well, a couple of things. One thing, let's just change that to a bandpass. So the low frequency and high frequency can either be shelves or band pass filters. And just so that you know, the frequency only goes from a certain amount to another certain amount. So don't think that you can then take this beyond there. So make sure that you're doing things in the right order. You know, if you're wanting to work with low frequencies, then choose one of the low frequency ones. Whereas, you know, you don't want to start going, oh yeah, well that's it. Oh, and I can't quite get over to where I need to get to with some of the other ones. They've got quite a lot of frequency range, but it can be annoying when you switch on the wrong one. The only other thing to mention on here is the dB per octave. I'll just zoom out again and just flip over to my keynotes. So this just shows you what 6 dB per octave is. So all it means is an octave is doubling of frequency. So the roll off either going one way or the other way, or if this was a band pass, it would, you know, sort of be like that in between. It's saying that for every octave it reduces by 6 dB. So that's what that's saying there. So if we go back over to Pro Tools, we've got the choice of 6 dB, 12, 18 or 24. So I'll show you that with it switched on. We'll just switch these other ones off for now. So you can see when I change it, it's very steep at the moment, a steep slope, and the more I reduce it, you can see this is getting sort of, well, less steep. Okay, so depending on what sort of sound you're wanting, then this can be an interesting one to work with. I'm just going to flip over to the page, just let's make sure. Okay, so all I'm going to do is just have a little play with the kick. Now please don't think that because I've given you some settings here that these are the ones to use when I have a play with it. I'm doing this very quickly. I haven't got the best listening room at all, so do make sure that you're paying attention to what you're doing. To reset these, by the way, if you just hold down the command key, the alt key, it's the one, I think it looks like the Starship Enterprise, if any Trekkie fans there, and you just click on the rotary control and it will reset it to where it was before. Okay, so the first thing I always do when I'm EQing stuff is I get rid of what I definitely don't want from the low end and the high end. So let's just listen to that kick. So lots of people think that that we want to keep all the low end with a kick, but a lot of the time we don't. So I usually put it on a really high dB per octave, and then if I just sweep this, so we're starting around there to start losing stuff, so I'll back it off a little bit. So probably that's fine, and then I can do the same with the low pass filter. And lots of people with this would just go, oh well, we only want that kick, but actually there's so much more in there. Okay, now of course you're getting spill from the other instruments, and usually we'd use things like a gate to reduce these, but in this assignment we're only using EQ. But don't try and filter out everything, it'll be quite hard to do. So we'll just work on making that kick sound better, just have a listen to things. So one thing I like to do is if you bring up the gain of one really loud and put it on a really narrow Q, so 10's the most narrow it'll go on here, and then just sweep through the frequencies and see what sounds good and what doesn't sound good. So we'll start over here. So we're getting a lot different sound there. You could also hear what's not so great. So around here, we've got a bit of a ring there. But let's go on with the boosting. So I quite like around there, but we don't want to boost it that much, so now we can bring it down. And it just brings a little peak out a little bit, and you could always widen it if you want as well. Again, don't look at these settings too much, this is me doing it really quickly. So we noticed that there was a bit of a ring around here, so let's just try and get rid of that. So put that cue really thin. So there's a bit of a ring there. So the easiest way to reduce this now is keep it nice and thin and then do that, and we'll just see if there's any more nasty ones that we really want to get rid of. So you're getting some sort of sounds there, but the more annoying ones are lower down. So it's definitely around this area, so I'll cut that out a little bit as well. Okay, so I've hardly done any increase. I've increased this tiny little section by 4 dB, but everything else has been reduced. And I'd probably play around a little bit more with that as well. So then you might want to move on to the next instrument and also see what it sounds like with everything else. So we'll solo all of the drums for now and just see what they sound like together. Oops, and our drums overheads all the way over there. Okay, so that's sounding quite nice now, and then we can work on the other instruments. Now, I think sometimes it's quite good to solo an instrument just to be able to really hear where the rings are, that sort of thing, but then move on to listening to the EQ as a whole. The snare, I will say to you, does have some nasty rings in it. I'll very quickly just demonstrate. So let's do the same thing again. Oh, and there's some... That's quite interesting there. There's some bad hits that you might need to copy and paste out of there. So around there's a really nasty ring around, sort of all in this section, so it's worthwhile having a good listen through. So rarely do I boost things, it's always cutting them. And then if you take a note, so that was 561, let's just have a look over at this one. Okay, so 584 is where I cut it to start with, and between there. So it's definitely some rings that are going through and being recorded on all of the mics. So something to be aware of there. Now say for example I had 2 kicks on here and I wanted to start off in the same position. What you can do with your settings is actually save them. So it says preset here. We could go to the top of the settings menu and save settings as. And we could give it a name. I'll just call it kick 1. And it'll save it into the EQ section. So this is just my test at the moment. And I'll click save. And that's saved in that section. So I could go over to another one. Pretend that this one's another kick or something I want to work with, and I can then go to where it says factory default and I can find my kick 1, and that automatically loads those up, so it's a nice way of being able to copy them. You also do have in here lots of different presets, so there are ones for drums, overhead, kick drums, so it can be nice to actually, you know, go through these and just see what it sounds like. But one thing I'd always say is you need to be making your mixes individual over everyone else's. So if everybody used this kick subtractive, for example, then it's all going to sound the same. So sometimes it could be a nice thing to work with and then move on from there. The other thing as well with inserts, if you want to move one, say that you just added one in the wrong place, just click and drag it over, so that'll move it over to there. If you want to duplicate it as it is, hold down the Alt key, click and drag, and that will copy the settings identically over. If you want to suspend one, so stop it working, just hold down the Command key and click on it, and this bypasses it. It's the same as clicking on this bypass button here, but saves you having to go into the plugin. And if you wanted to bypass everything on Insert A, hold down the Alt and Command key at the same time, and that will bypass all of them. Okay, so give it a go, add an EQ to your track. So it's the only plugin that you're allowed to use on this, so do make sure that you have a good play with it. And later on in other videos we'll look at how you can automate these plugins as well. Okay, thanks very much.